a lot of people don't realize that condo financing is completely different than single family financing. It really takes, it's a partnership and it's a planning to make sure that the project and the way the sales is done fits to where it's a successful outcome for the developer, the sales team, and the consumer. But it's for sure a niche type of product that we're bringing to market. And it used to 20 years ago, that was the entry point. Hey everyone, so excited today. I have Dean Jones, CEO of Realogics Sotheby's, which is a huge, very reputable and well-known real estate brokerage in Seattle, the East Side. You've probably seen many of his amazing events and marketing. They are the best in the business. And I find Dean to be just a wealth of knowledge who absolutely always knows what's going on in the market, sets the trends, doesn't follow trends, but he sets the trends. And I'm so excited to talk to you today and just hear what you think. There's so many things happening right now.
It's crazy time, dynamic
crazy
business.
Crazy times. And the one thing we always know in our business is it's constant change.
It is.
There's nothing that ever just stays dormant. And we're coming into the end of the year, looking forward to 2025. Guaranteed it's going to be a whole new theme.
New cycle.
So what I'd love to kick us off with, because we have known each other and worked together for over 20 years.
That's right.
Definitely 2 or 3 cycles.
Yes.
And I feel like we're kind of on the precipice of another one that looks very different from the ones we've been through. So would you please tell for our audience, just talk about a bit about yourself, like your background, because you have a very unique background, how you got in this business, how you launched Realogics, and would love to hear about that.
Oh, it's a journey. Well, originally raised in a development family in Vancouver, BC, came to do developments here with the family business in the early 90s. There was a residential renaissance of downtown Seattle at that time, and was doing sales and marketing for our development group. Then after 9/11 and a lot of shift in the economy, the parent business went back to Canada, but I stayed behind and started Realogics in 2002, consulting with lenders and developers, working out on their projects, many of which were in downtown Seattle, in Belltown and surrounding areas. And then, created the brokerage side of things, handling our own sales in 2009, affiliated with Sotheby's International Realty in 2010. And here we are, 15 years later now, and just 6 offices and running both new developments as well as resale enterprise for the region.
Yeah. Well, in your knowledge and experience in the development role is just incredible. Like some of the longest condos that we have, like the Concord, and, I can think of several other ones, like you've had a big hand in the sales on those and, bringing them into the Seattle marketplace. I don't know of anybody that's got the knowledge base.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, we work with some incredible and inspiring individuals. I mean, the balance is market research, product development, marketing, and sales. We think new development should be novel and deliver something distinct for the marketplace instead of just more inventory that matched maybe what was there before. And we are always inspired by other markets. And I think in a lot of ways, our experience in both Vancouver and San Francisco was a harbinger for what might come for Seattle. There's a lot of trends we could talk to about where we are in that trajectory, but it's really familiar to me in some of the urbanization trends that we've experienced, whether it's centered around the waterfront, light rail, or just a live, work, and play, urban environment. We're now seeing 20 years later, a lot of those trends play out, or Asian investment and so on and so forth. We could go on.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's interesting is I remember, a few years back, we were kind of talking about the Manhattanization of Seattle that you coined that phrase. And it was so true because, really before what was about 2010, there wasn't really a lot of activity downtown, but in the last condo cycle, we saw this flurry of condos and people really going downtown.
Right.
It was thriving. People were really embracing that smaller space, live simply, more share, the shared economy, which the young Gen Z and millennials love. I would love, and then we had COVID, of course.
Yes.
So that people kind of left the city.
We actually lost population downtown, and we had lines around the block for our condominium pre-sales back in 2016 and 17. I would say leaning into 17 was the peak of that cycle, and then it only took a couple of years of some political dysfunction and some fear of the trends reversing course. We have HQ2, with Amazon's decision and their choice to really become 425. Let's be honest. I think that's going to be their largest other satellite, headquarters beyond downtown Seattle. But that was the beginning of some of the changes. COVID certainly didn't help. The social challenges, more political dysfunction, and just a loss of confidence. But I dare say that with time, that heals. And the bruises we took politically and from a brand of downtown Seattle is now in full recovery. And I would submit that by 2025, we have a residential renaissance in the making yet again.
Yeah, I would love to. I agree with you. And I would love to talk more about that. Like, what are you kind of seeing in the markets on what you think is sort of on the horizon and are kind of already seeing in the footprints? Amazon has now put in the mandatory come back to work.
Yes.
How do you think that will impact both like Seattle, Bellevue, and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, it's we can talk about supply and demand. We can talk about demographic trends, kind of the state of politics, and what Mayor Harrell is attempting to do, and I think driving to some of those goals as well about ensuring downtown Seattle is a safer place to do business and to reside, and other trends that are macro, like massive multi-billion-dollar investments, whether it's the convention center expansion, which is changing the game. We've had record hospitality in the summer of 2024, and also the new multi-billion-dollar waterfront. There's another cue there from what we saw in the Embarcadero in San Francisco, or certainly, Vancouver's waterfront seawall system. So these are all really good signs, and we are returning to downtown now. We had a record month of condominium sales in November. I think that wasn't just because of the announcement of Amazon saying, hey, we would like to fill up some of this office space. Will you please come back to work January 1, 5 days a week? But it was also the political outcomes, just moving past some of those fears that other consumers were having. And also the mortgage rate environment, which I'm certain you are going to touch on. So there were many causes for pauses, if you will, leading up through and past these last couple of years. But the demand potential has never really gone away. I will point out that, back in the early to 2010 through the last decade, let's say, downtown Seattle was the fastest growing large city in the United States. Within walking distance of our office in Belltown, we saw 35,000 plus multifamily units get developed. But do you know the percentage of them that were developed for sale?
No.
6%.
That's crazy.
Yeah, the substantial majority is for rent.
Why do you think that is mainly?
It's the economics for developers. It's the Washington State Condominium Act. It's the millennial consumer, which is a primary demographic that was more apt to rent before buying. We will see a massive shift in that for a number of reasons. We can talk about, their restricted stock units and, the values of their portfolios. But I think in general, we are now a city of renters. And I don't think many people realize that the majority of residents in the city of Seattle are renting.
A few years back, I saw a statistic, it was like 65 or 70%. And the thing about it is I think some of these millennials and Gen Z are getting the message, but there's a massive difference in people's overall wealth. Like statistically, if they buy their first property in their 20s or even their early 30s versus if they wait to be 40 years old before they buy their first house. It's the numbers, you can't deny them. And it's interesting because we've seen these younger generations, the millennials and the Gen Z, they've kind of shied away from owning anything. They tend to like experiences more. They want to travel. They want to be more free. They don't want to be committed. And so I think my question is, how do we get that message to them so that they don't view buying as more of like an anchor around their neck, but more as like, what it does is it brings them the type of wealth and just consistency, I would say, to where they can actually do more of what they like doing.
Well, I think it matters what you buy, when you buy it, and what you pay for it. So let's remember the markets are cyclical, and we probably went on one of the greatest, peak to trough journeys over the last 6 years that I've seen. I mean, it's reminiscent of the Great Recession or even post 9/11. So here's now three major pivot points since we've known each other. And there is a time to buy for sure. And I think there's a time to rent. But because of supply and demand, we've seen correction with the majority of the high-rise condominium developments that were delivered since 2020 in the neighborhood of 20 to 30%. So now that correction has taken place and we have 6 projects that are still in sellout mode right now, some of that are nearly sold out, some that have a ways to go still, but there is 1,924 residential units for sale in these current inventory developments. Just over 500 are left to sell. So there is about a quarter of that inventory that still remains in the overhang, if you will, for developers. So they had to mark to market over these last couple of years. And they are directly competing with rental alternatives. I will say that some of these apartment buildings that are being developed are as nice, or in some cases nicer than some of the condominium developments of the yesteryear. But so really there is a decision about where do I want to live and what is the investment I would like to make. But now that we're seeing those corrected values, developers have all found their way to market. We call it marking to market, as you know, to be a conforming tower for mortgage lending, they needs to have a majority of the owner-occupied residents. And so until a developer is able to achieve that kind of trajectory with a mortgage lender such as Movement Mortgage, doing a lot of our mortgages, you realize it's just difficult to get a mortgage. And so now we're talking to an audience that needs a mortgage to buy a condominium, that if they can't secure that until the development is a little further along in sales, then it's a fait accompli and a self-fulfilling prophecy about an injured development. So the developer has only one choice, which is to lower the pricing until they meet the market. And we need to talk about that because that's why we don't have any new groundbreakings. What you see is what you get for inventory.
And in my opinion, like the condos are the biggest opportunity for home buyers right now. Today, right now. If you are a first-time home buyer or if you are that couple that owns a 5,000 square foot house out in the suburbs and your kids have left the house, but you're like holding on to this 3% interest rate that you have, but you're like, God, where am I going to move? I really don't need this much space. Condos, there's some great deals downtown. Bellevue, although I think you were mentioning Bellevue's a little bit higher pricing.
It's 15 to 20% higher pricing than downtown Seattle. There's far fewer developments and overall units. And some would view more job propensity. Amazon's still committed to 25,000 employment and fulfilling a lot of their footprint that they've invested in downtown Bellevue. But don't count out downtown Seattle. I mean, even if there is 15 plus, I've heard even higher numbers in terms of millions of square feet of vacant or sublet space available. I don't view that as a negative. I view that as a very positive silver lining because that's the runway of job growth. Let's not forget why downtown Seattle was the fastest growing large city in the United States over the last 10 years and still is ranking among the top. It's because of the attractive lifestyle, the walk to work. At that hour, it was attainable home ownership and or renting. We were a no tax state for capital, well, now we have capital gains taxes, but we don't have the income taxes such as the Bay Area. So we actually had as many job opportunities from headquartered companies in the Bay Area that had larger satellite offices up in the Seattle area because it's recruiting and retention. So when we bruised ourselves with some of the political policies and we saw everyone wanting to live on a salmon stream, we actually lost housing opportunity in a sense because 5,000 people left downtown Seattle. And now we fully recovered that. It actually happened very quickly after, the recovery post-COVID. And now with the population growing again, the office workers, traffic will increase. That's going to put more demand on folks to want to live in the city And we're actually seeing that trend of people buying in, including investors, Carese, because they see that wave coming back ashore and they don't want to be behind the curve. They want to be ahead of it, because once this inventory burns through, the replacement cost on the next round of new developments for sale are about 50% higher than what we are currently selling these homes for.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing I think people don't realize is the cost is all based on what it costs the developer to what their hard construction costs are going to be, what their cost of the land is, what the cost of development. And it costs a lot to build a condominium.
It does.
To put it up as a condo versus putting it up as an apartment. And the laws that are out there that, fiercely protect consumers make it difficult. While it's good for the consumer, it's very challenging for a developer to put that up. And what is the amount of years it takes? Like from the time a developer says, oh, I really like this piece of land, I think I might do feasibility and might buy it to develop a condo. What kind of time frame
is that? The quick math is 5 years from concept to closing. And as you can see, over these last 5 years, we've certainly seen a remarkable change in the market and the consumer psyche. So that's a lot of risk for a developer. And once they commit to going forward as a condominium, especially if they start closing, they are really going to have to continue selling through that development. You don't want to see a hybrid situation where you have a few condominium owners and then the rest of the units as an apartment, because it affects financing and such and so forth. Also, you have to remember that it's relatively difficult to convert an apartment building to a condominium, because a lot of times they've been underwritten and insured, and also with the architects of record are precluded from selling them because they're just a more litigious asset class. But for the greater development community, they're just simply renting and holding these assets because that is a more sure bet, especially as rents rise. And unfortunately, that is what's crimping the pipeline for sale, but is also making us more confident that buying at the correct price today with relatively little inventory, I think we could easily see 3 to 5 years in this dearth of supply. And you know what, Carese, that's exactly what happened after the Great Recession. We delivered the final occupancy in the last round of new towers for sale, condominiums in 2010. And we didn't see a new occupancy opportunity until 2015.
Interesting. Yeah.
So history's repeating itself for different reasons, but the same dynamics are playing out.
Yeah, because there is nothing brand new that's really on the books.
There are several projects.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
They have not broken ground. So the headwinds we have are several. Number one, their inflation in the costs of these developers are facing the same financing woes that you've been hearing about, because to borrow has actually the underwriting for construction financing is actually more stringent than ever. There's an overhang of supply that's still finding its way to market. And again, those current strike prices are averaging under $1,000 a square foot, where the replacement costs are about $1,500 a square foot. So until the market is going to support something more than $1,500 a square foot on average, developers are just going to tread water. There are a number of projects that have been primed to break ground, but they're actually more likely to lose their entitlements before they break ground, because it's been so many years since they were initially permitted with the master use permit. So there's other policies. I'm sure we'll get some extending programs from the city officials, or they may just go forward as an apartment, which is 94% of the units I mentioned earlier have been for rent and not for sale.
Yeah. It's interesting, with the financing piece of it, because a lot of people don't realize that condo financing is completely different than single family financing. And it really it's a partnership and it's a planning to make sure that the project and the way the sales is done fits to where it's a successful outcome for the developer, the sales team, and the consumer. And, it's fun. I've loved being in the condo space, but it's for sure a niche type of a product that we're bringing to market. And it used to 20 years ago, that was the entry point for people. That was their first home that they
I think
bought.
it still is. Condominium
Yeah.
product offering is incredibly important to our marketplace and consumer because a townhome product line or even an ADU or a DADU, which would be an accessory unit within House Bill 1110, which has to be imposed with all policies by the end of this year and permits ready for pulling by mid-year next year. That's across the entire state.
Yes.
But I think you will be surprised at how few residential units make it to market, and very few of them will be offered for sale. Again, most of that product will be for rent. So getting back to the importance of condominium, I think we need some legislative overhaul with the Condominium Act. It is consumer protection that works so well that it frightens developers. They are only supposed to retain 5% earnest money deposit in the event that a buyer wants to walk away. And over 5 years from initial pre-sale to final occupancy, a lot can change for the consumer and the market. If the market corrects more than 5% and that's all they have at risk, what's going to happen?
Yeah, they're going to walk away.
Or they'll renegotiate. And lenders know that, so they want to see, the fundamental underwriting, to be more supportive of the development. And so until those tea leaves are reading that way, these projects are finding it very difficult to get financing. Compare that to my hometown in Vancouver, where they can secure 20, 25, or 30% non-refundable deposits, and those deposits are released to the developer as part of the capital stack. 100% of the capital stack needs to be funded by the developer and their mezzanine and construction financing. They can't spend any of the money in escrow because the developer has to perform in the state of Washington before they can touch that earnest money. So I think some reform needs to happen. Otherwise, we'll just continue to see more of the same, which is a rental environment, higher rents, and less attainable ownership opportunities.
Well, you get a much more committed buyer when they're having to put 20 to 30%. They're much more committed. They have more skin in the game. And the developer, by having the use of those funds, has more working capital.
Yes.
And then they can move quicker. They can get down the road on the project to get it finished quicker.
Right.
Versus here. Yeah, it's like 5% to some people. It's like, whatever. If it doesn't work out, I'll walk away.
Right.
But that's not a committed buyer. And it makes it really tough. I think that we would have a lot more inventory if there was some reform on that act.
It needs to happen. And I mean, our affordable housing crisis is at a point of non-recovery at this point. I just don't see any legislation that's going to deliver the kind of housing opportunities that are needed. And the idea of converting office buildings into thousands of residential units is just unlikely for a number of reasons. It's the format, it's the financing, it's the desirability, and frankly, it's the cost. It almost is the same as building new construction. So your other solutions are just to drive to affordability, which isn't great in a market that is already struggling with congestion, with the waterways and the freeway systems and the tunnels and hills. I think light rail, Sound Transit 3 has some potential of some game-changing destinations for us. You're already seeing all those applications up and down the 116 miles of new track that Sound Transit 3 is putting forth. It's exciting to see. But that is a concept that we saw with BART in San Francisco, or we saw with SkyTrain in British Columbia, Vancouver, Lower Mainland. I mean, these are policies that should have been in place decades ago.
Yes.
And in fact, it was in the early 70s that federal funding for what was going to be a subway system in Seattle actually went to Atlanta.
Yes, we were nuts that we turned that down. We missed that because it is making a difference. Like you're already seeing it, on the east side. So they have it up and running from Bellevue out to Redmond. You're already seeing it. It hasn't quite been connected just yet from Seattle to Bellevue, but I have to imagine that's going to make a big difference both ways. I've got to think that.
Well, they will ultimately upzone, in my opinion, especially in maybe in industrial areas. I think the Bell Red corridor is ripe for this. Not preaching policy, just ideas of what I've seen in other markets. So everywhere light rail landed in the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, ultimately got upzoned and became a little emerald city along that yellow brick road, if you will. So think of that from that analogy that light rail should reach a destination of higher density, and then it links these nodes together. But these are all policies that can take decades to work through, the local NIMBY situation and political will. And so I think the challenge is, in general, with supply and demand, with high density housing, especially for sale, the demand can rise much quicker than the supply.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't see this dog catching the car when it comes to affordability. And so when you go through a market cycle like now, and we know the cost to deliver a new supply is going to be much higher, we see this renaissance of people relocating again back to the city center, which is going to drive more vitality for retail, residential services, restaurants, cultural venues, and all the great attractions that we enjoyed in the years past. My belief is it's all going to come full circle.
The businesses are going to come back in when they see the people coming back in.
Right.
And I will say, the good news from the financing perspective is each year our loan limits have gone up and they continue to go up. It's the conforming loan limit is going up again. We're already actually funding loans on it. It's up to 802,650, which that's 50,000 more. It's roughly 40,000 more than what it is, what it has been for last year. But each year it's gone up. And then the high balance. So at the conventional limit of 802,650, you could go 3% down up to a purchase price of around 843. I mean, a few years ago, that would have seemed like crazy. With the high balance limit, which should be announced kind of mid-December, we'll see if it increases from the 977,500 limit it's been at the last 2 years. But if it does, currently where it's at now, you could go to $1,050,000 roughly.
Wow.
A little bit less than $1,050,000 with 5% down, and be able to get in to a house with little to nothing down.
Well, that's assuming you can find a home.
Yes,
in that
you
price
can find
point.
something. Yeah. But for condos, I think that helps condos, new construction or resale.
Correct.
Just because it helps people. A lot of times their biggest issue is the down payment piece.
Right. It's the more attainable
Yeah.
step on the ladder of home ownership for sure. That's another trend that we're seeing is not just investors making a comeback, but a lot of families are helping their children get out of the rental situation. They're going through gifting programs to help with that down payment. And even if they're not ready for this to be their future retirement home, they're realizing now's the time to buy it, and they can simply rent it out for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's kind of the epiphany that I had when you're looking at the market cycles. And, we're here 100 years after the last pandemic. And, certainly the roaring 20s could make a playbook again here in the Seattle Bellevue metro area. Because if at some point, this is the decade that you're going to retire, you're going to sell the larger single family home. You've had 4 or 5 bedrooms that haven't had a head on the pillow for many, many years. That's fine. Maybe you wait to sell the single family home at the peak of the market in the next couple of years. We could talk about policies and why I think that's going to happen. But also, when's the time to buy the condominium downsize?
Yes.
Single level lock and leave lifestyle. I mean, my parents just went through that in Vancouver, where they got out of the big home that they had been in for a long time, and they are now really enjoying that single level lifestyle. And then they're spending half their time, traveling and checking in on the concierge and saying all's well at home, and just go out there and live your best life in the sunset.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And, it's interesting that a lot of the concept of the generational support, the generational housing support, we're seeing that trend where people have gone in, they've got the kids have left, they've gone to college, they're now getting out on their own, they're creating their own families, and they're having a hard time buying that first home because of the pricing and the affordability. And so the concept where a lot of these people have discussed this with their estate attorneys, and as an estate attorney put it to me, and my parents, hey, you can gift with a warm hand or you can gift with a cold hand. And gifting with the warm hand gives the next generation that leg up on being able to get into that house, and you get to see it. You get to see. But I think a lot of people don't realize, and I myself didn't realize this since until I went through this with my parents, that you can gift more than $18,000 per person a year. A lot of people don't realize that. Every single person has the ability to gift up to whatever the federal limit is for estate taxes without having to pay estate taxes on it. Right now, that amount is $13 million. The difference is if you gift more than $18,000 in any one year, given year, you have to file a form with the IRS and just note that gift is. And they essentially keep a tally on you. Of course, everyone should check with their CPA. Everyone's got a different scenario. I'm not a CPA. I'm just telling you from my own experience, from the advice I've received from a CPA and estate, is that people that know that you can actually gift an entire house to your kids.
It's going to happen.
Yes.
And you look at generational wealth transfer. I mean, the $90 trillion number that is being tossed around between wealth managers and estate planners, given the baby boomers and the silent generation, and looking to their Gen X, Gen Y, children and grandchildren, there will be a tremendous boon of investment activity associated with that wealth transfer. And that will absolutely impact demand for housing. And I agree with you, the warm hand gifting is much more enjoyable to watch generational wealth get to work in and through their children and grandchildren acquiring real estate. It has still been the best investment, even though the stock market is booming. But that's another reason why I think that if that is a peaking, in securities market, then we could see some of that money coming back into real estate as well, which is another reason I think the Thrive in 25 is something we're anticipating. So again, timing the market really has a lot to do with where things might be going in the future, realizing that waiting to buy could only result perhaps in less selection, higher prices. And I'm not as concerned about the mortgage rates because you and I both know the strike price is more important than the current rate. We'll just refi later.
And that's the thing I think a lot of people, consumers can get really focused in on the interest rates. And you came up with something I thought was just genius. It's what's worse, fear of mortgage interest or FOMI, or fear of missing out, which is FOMO. And I would say in the last few years, a lot of people get really honed in on the interest rate, which is fear of the mortgage interest, which keeps them from buying. And that's worse than fear of missing out.
Well, they also have FOPO, right? Which is fear of political outcome. And I think that wait and see mentality, it's always more easily understood to just extend your decision, and not make a commitment, just to hit that button, let's lease another year, or let's wait until the headlines tell me that everyone else is doing it. But, our success has come around from leading the trend lines that become the headlines. Our job as advisors are to go to where the market's going next and get there first. And so we have to pay attention to these things about, what's the Fed going to do next? What is the political likelihood with various administrative scenarios? I mean, it was a big deal to watch what happened and ultimately didn't get appealed with the capital gains tax of Washington. But you can see the pressures of taxation, and there's winner and loser states as it relates to that kind of migration. Certainly looking at demographics, as you know, the state of Washington is a rather costly state to die in. And so there's a lot of real estate planning that goes around other more friendly states, whether that's Arizona or Florida. But looking at all those trends and trying to decide how is that going to impact. But I'll tell you the one trend, getting back to the urban core, that's not going to go anywhere. the residential renaissance of Seattle and Bellevue, for that matter, is happening.
Yeah.
And there is just too many fundamental reasons for that. And so I think anyone that's betting against that outcome is likely to regret that decision in the next 5 years.
I would agree with that completely. It's rates will come down. They will. You just have to look at history. So what's most important is the price you're getting into that property for.
Right.
And there's not going to be a lower price than there is right now, given where the trend is going. And we're seeing it. So if somebody's thinking about it, they should do it and get in, get the right price, because you can't renegotiate a price. You can always renegotiate a rate with a refinance, and you're going to build that equity. And, I would say to the parents that are out there, because you brought up a great point, state of Washington is one of, I think it's 9 states across the United States that has a state estate tax. And in this state, it starts at a pretty low amount that most people don't realize, like $2.193 million. There's a lot of people that have estates that are worth more than that. And so by gifting that money to the kids before, they pass away, it gets it out of the estate, it gets it to the kids, and the kids can use it to buy that place and to get into that home, to bridge that gap while we're waiting for interest rates to come down.
That's right.
But it gets them in at a great price point in that house. So that would kind of be 2 things I would say. Talk to your state attorney, and also get in the market. There's no better time.
Well, and anticipate what's the likely headline, in the spring sales season. And knowing that with lower mortgage rates and more encouraging news in the economy, likely there'll be more buyer activity. So you'll end up competing with, again, multiple offers. We're seeing it already, not so much on the in-city condominium market, which is why there's still incentives. And unless it's a really distinct and unique property, there's not as much competition. But that's why we can purchase at, a third off of what might have been the original pre-sale value. So, but in some other markets, we are already seeing heightened demand and multiple offers. And let's be clear, S&P Case-Shiller, next week we'll find out what's happening with the latest data. But if it's 50 basis points a month that median home prices are rising in the 4-county area in this metropolitan measurement, then what is the difference of paying a few points higher than you wanted to, or you remembered when you could have secured a 3 or 4% mortgage? Because if you're paying, 6% or 10% more a year from now for the same home, that just simply erodes any value of not purchasing much sooner, right? So you can always refi is my point.
Well, and I bet you anytime you ask somebody, if you could go back in time, and it's 2010. Do you wish you would have bought in 2010? They're like, yes. Oh my gosh. That was arguably one of the best run-ups we have had after the financial crash.
Also because there was, bank-owned real estate, and remember all the short sales?
Yes.
Jump into the MLS. Tell me how many short sales you see today. There's just simply too much equity in these homes. I do think that some of the new regulations that you were part of after the financial crisis has done the work it needed to make sure that you were a qualified borrower, but that also has made the strongest bench of equity I've ever seen in housing values that have gone up, many cases double from what they were, 10 or 15 years ago. So simply put, even though there's been some correction, these are not injured borrowers. There are very little distress out there. So anyone waiting for some shoe to drop saying, I'm going to wait to buy that bank-owned property, show me the bank that owns the property, other than the commercial real estate market.
Ever since the financial crash, foreclosure rates are very, very low. And default rates are very, very low. In fact, to your point, the amount of equity that has been derived over the last, 15 years, I don't know the stats on that, like from history, but it is a lot. And that has saved a lot of people, like, especially, if they're going into retirement and maybe they didn't have as much saved as they had planned to, or heaven forbid, they need assisted living or they need memory care. I've seen where the equity in those houses, and there's several financing vehicles that we can use to get people access to that equity. But it has saved people because it's a forced savings, and it's a savings that they were able to experience passively. And that's a piece with real estate that I think, you don't get with renting. And it cannot be understated, cannot be overstated, the importance, especially to the millennials, the Gen Z groups. Get in the market, like get on the ladder. Just can't do it soon enough.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. And it's a shame, I look back at Vancouver, and that's a market that's maybe 20 years ahead in terms of a lot of the fundamental policies, and the lack of affordability is really a concern there. And it's substantially more expensive. And they have far more vertical development than what was ever envisioned in the Seattle Bellevue metro area. And it's still not enough. So the idea of graduating and buying a home, and that is more than likely going to be a condominium or a townhome. They're rezoning so many of the arterials to create townhomes where there was prior duplex and single family homes. And I think that'll probably happen eventually surrounding the Seattle Bellevue metro area, because people can afford to live in less space. They just can't afford to pay higher prices. And the reality is the cost of living is far exceeding that as, the income levels. So it's going to be a challenge. And that's just one of the reasons why I don't think waiting around for a greater correction is likely. And as it relates to the most affordable product line, condominiums, we haven't seen these prices and values with incentives for buyers in the last cycle. It was 2010, 2011, the last time we saw a buying environment like we do today. And, if we were still 50% of the supply unsold, or we were unclear about the trajectory of any of these buildings for their financial underwriting, or we thought they were a risk of going back to the bank, I would maybe hold my breath a little bit, but they've all been answered. And so again, what you see is what you get for inventory. There's no new supply in the ground or vertically. These are plans that are going to be deferred for a number of years, in my opinion. And so the market gets to recover, and history repeats itself. And when we do see a pre-sale market come back, maybe in a couple of years, it'll be at 50% higher prices.
Yeah. I absolutely, for sure. I mean, that's what the numbers, it's all about math, and that's what the numbers show. I think it's going to be interesting if there's other companies that will follow Amazon in the back to work. Have we heard of any other companies?
They will all
here?
follow.
They will all follow.
It's also an attrition event as the corporate environment is cleaning house also with what they're paying out for various work positions, and they're also nursing significant overhead associated with their commercial workspaces. And so I think you're going to see other tech titans follow suit. Certainly Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and many others, Expedia and such, are all going to say, if they can do it, we're going to do it too. But, the fear that they have, especially in South Lake Union, where they work alongside each other, is, back in the day, they were walking across the street and going to a food truck and getting 3 job offers as they crossed. And so the tech worker, one of the reasons they were renting so much is that they were very limber and could bounce between Chicago and Manhattan Beach and LA and San Francisco, and then maybe back to Seattle or Bellevue. And I think that's been the pressure that the tech companies have faced. They didn't have any other city that invested more heavily in creating office infrastructure than in the Seattle Bellevue metro area in the last 10 years. And so in some ways we had the greatest migration of tech workers that also wanted to live in our beautiful, outdoor environments on a salmon stream when it was okay to remote in. So the hybrid work week is still very attractive to these consumers. And in some cases, they're saying, if you're going to force me to come back to work, I'll just go work for the other company that won't force me.
Right.
So it'll be interesting, a little fight.
It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Yeah. It's and other cities too. I mean, Silicon Valley's got that issue down in California. I have to imagine too. It's probably the same, or you think
So
a little bit?
that's in repair and recovery as well. I think the Bay Area is giving us some tea leaves of what's to come here.
Yeah.
And downtown San Francisco, which has had a lot of the same challenges and tech overhead challenges as well as we have seen in Seattle Bellevue, but they have also seen a renaissance in residential and more condominium sales this year than the last 2 years combined. A lot of that office space is being turned over with new users. And so whether it's a larger tech titan that is subletting space or just not renewing its office space, these buildings are getting reset in terms of their asking prices for commercial office space. And actually, we've seen the same in Seattle. And those Class C, Class B, ex-urban office park tenants are now upgrading into Class A, infill, urbanized environments because it helps them for recruiting and retention as well.
Yeah.
So I think the ultimate watershed is going to be those outlying commercial buildings that I think could be part of our solution for housing because maybe they get rezoned.
Yes. Well, and going to that bill that just passed, I don't think is being talked about enough. It's not on the local media, which shocks me, about the zoning
For
that
House
has
Bill 1110?
changed. Yes. All of Washington. Most people don't realize it's like you could build a minimum of 6 units on a lot. I just actually a couple months ago had the first purchase of a property where it was literally they had built another whole second single family home, like on the same property under this new bill. How do you think, what do you think that's going to do in our market? Or how do you think it'll solve issues? Or do you think, what do you think the outcome of
we've had a
that's gonna be?
preview of that. Minneapolis had a similar bill adopted, and I think the number on that, this is over many years, was only delivering 2,500 or 3,000 additional dwelling units in single-family lots. When you speak of the 6-unit single family environments, those are all within walking distance of a light rail or mass transit line. For the most part, single family homes will see upwards of 4 dwelling units permitted. We're just going to start learning what each municipality thinks about the rules and regulations. There's a lot to consider as it relates to setbacks, parking, permit fees and such. And my understanding is all those municipalities must report by December 31 of 2024. And so there will be a gold rush of business opportunities for real estate agents, for people to think, wow, I can do this on my property. And then those permits have to be pulled by July 1 of 2025. So they go from announcing the guidelines to allowing the actual development to occur just in 6 months. So I think there will be a tremendous amount of activity, whether that's stick built on your property, renovating basements, or working with companies like Tin Cabin Company, who is building beautiful, engineered but modular single family homes to nearly passive house quality that can crane over and drop in your backyard and you are brushing your teeth and sleeping there that night. So it'll be a whole new industry. I also think there'll be a trend of for tax reasons, I haven't figured this one out, but I saw it happen in Vancouver, where the owners of the larger single family home decided to effectively divest from the larger single family home and turn it into a rental opportunity, move into the ADU, harvest their equity, convert it from a primary residence into an investment residence, and then consider that for future 1031 exchange and or DST for capital gains tax deferral strategies. So there could be a whole new ecosystem associated with this because they don't need all that space, but they might not be ready to sell it either. So it'll be very interesting.
I think it's going to be fascinating because, and you're seeing some really unique prefab type housing that's coming out that is very affordable, that to your point, you could drop in and it could be, the ADU or, yeah,
You want to hear an
gonna be-
interesting fact?
yeah.
To buy those types of homes are about $1,000 a square foot, which is about the average price per square foot of what our new condominiums are selling for in downtown Seattle. So you have sort of a parity between, whether that new residential dwelling is in somebody's backyard or it's, 300 feet in the air in an urban environment. But there could be thousands of new ADUs and DADUs, which is a detached auxiliary dwelling unit, in single family environments. I think there will also be a number of communities that are less than thrilled with doubling the residential population and traffic in neighborhoods that might not want to see that. So I think it'll be a very much headline story in January as all the municipalities report in.
Yes.
And I think Seattle will be one of the more progressive ones because there's a lot of pressure, to answer and ring this bell.
Well, and the biggest population is over there too. It's going to be fascinating with that deadline at the end of December. Yeah, it's crazy. One of the things like that I've loved hearing about is your Jones Family Foundation. Like, it's just phenomenal what you guys are doing. I would love to have you tell our audience a bit more about it. You're really reaching so many incredible people.
Oh, thank you. Well, I mean, it's my parents' foundation, and I'm a proud director. But we have actually initiated several programs to U.S.-based charities, including those associated with you, Carese, and Movement Mortgage. The most recent one is we have a $150,000 fundraising goal by the year end. And as you know, if you buy with RSIR and you borrow with Movement Mortgage, we can build with New Story Homes and basically turn that transaction into 3 residential housing ownership opportunities for New Story Homes communities in Mexico.
It's incredible.
And if we think we have an affordability challenge here, the distance that so many Mexican nationals have to go to even develop credit, let alone home ownership, it's just a journey and a bridge too far. And so what New Story Homes is doing is extraordinary, and it makes it so much more accessible for us to get behind them in their 10-year anniversary. So we're very passionate about that, in addition to many other local charitable organizations, and then the will of our brokers through RSIR Cares, which will in 2025 be our 501c3 gifting program to partner with Movement Mortgage further and do some things collaboratively. But this is the time of giving, and we're blessed in so many ways, and this is one way that we can give back to our community.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's great to be in a position where we can do that and make such a difference. But I've really enjoyed hearing about it. I think it's amazing what your parents have done and in you, and, to be able to give back to those people. And it really helps those communities, being that it's our neighbor. And we have a lot of incredible Mexican immigrants, and they've got families back there in Mexico that, it's phenomenal to be able to support that.
100%. Yeah. Well, thanks for all of your contributions as well, and that of Movement Mortgage Foundation. I think that is one of the greatest opportunities that we have in this industry, is to collaborate like this and make some meaningful change.
Absolutely. That was one of the biggest things that drew me to come to Movement was, I think, the vision our CEO had.
Casey Crawford
is incredible.
Yes,
and through
human being.
Our KM Foundation, 49% of the profits on every single loan we close goes into that KM Foundation. And through the foundation, we're able to fund, employee sponsored charities in the area, and to do initiatives that we want to get behind, that are important to us. And that's really how his vision has empowered us as employees, to invest in nonprofits that we really care about. And I love it.
Impact lending.
Impact lending.
You're the mortgage we can feel good about paying, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when clients do business with us, they're actually going to impact the communities
100%.
that they're living and working in.
Well, we've so preferred you as our lender and
Thank you.
that of your team and the great work that you're doing with Movement Mortgage. I appreciate being with you on your show and talking shop.
Thank you so
much changes over 20 years and some things are just the same.
Some things are exactly the same. And it's like, this is an industry where teamwork makes the dream work.
Yes,
100%. So it takes all of us. And I've always loved that about our industry.
Yeah.
It's the best people in the world and we're able to make such an impact on so many people's lives. So
proud to do it with you.
I share the same sentiments with you too. So perfect. Well, thank you very much, Dean. It has been, as always,
my pleasure.
Such a great conversation. And I feel like people will get a lot out of this. So thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.